Hell yes. I nearly came to punch-ups with a guy in work today, and I'm not proud of myself. I know I can be a right prick at times, and a very abrupt prick. And that's just my personality type. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. I just don't. I'd have a very low tolerance for bullshit. And although what happened at work was absolutely my fault, the guy is a lovely man, and I've been friends with him for a while, and I never saw him act like this. But he had done something, and I was talking out loud to myself, and he took it that I was criticizing his work. And he just lost it and ran away calling me a prick. And I had to follow him and say, look, I wasn't talking about you. This is me talking about myself. And it's sorted now, but it was unfortunate because he's a decent guy and a good man. And I did offend him, and I know I can be a right asshole at times, but I know I'm an honest asshole. I don't fuck about with people, and there was a point there it nearly came to blows. He'd gone over the edge in some of the things he said. It was this close to fucking punching him, but I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have got that far. But it was raising itself to that level, and like I said, I know I can be an absolute cunt at times if I'm pushed up against a wall, and I was. In my opinion then, but it was my fault. We sorted it out, it's okay. But where does this come from? This idea that two egos and two personalities have to clash in extremes. From a misunderstanding, I might add, not from anything that was meant with malice or hurt for either side. And it suddenly exploded to the point where then it dissipates down into compromise, reconciliation, and understanding. It comes from the Abrahamic stuff again. Each person has this idea in their head programmed into them that only they're right and the other person is completely wrong. It's extreme, black and white. One God, one law, one rule, one opinion, one way. And that's an example of how the Abrahamic thing has damaged us. And in fact, the reason why I can be a prick sometimes is because of trying to survive a holy Catholic Ireland. I mean, I grew up in a country that was absolutely dominated by disgusting Catholic priests with enormous power and all kinds of religious lunatics. And that was literally the only way I could survive from the background I grew up in. All my friends from the Ballymun Flats, they're either all dead. I think they're probably all dead. Some drugs, others killed in gang violence. The majority alcoholism, dead by like 40. And that was because I was not going to allow myself to be eaten alive by a Christian behemoth, Holy Catholic Ireland, the way it had eaten alive the children in the grave in Tuam, the mothers in the Magdalene laundries, or sent our people to the four corners of the globe to try and escape this horror that the Christianity has foisted upon this beautiful island and this amazing people. And that's where that came from. And if you read like Catherine Nixby's The Darkening Age, and you see the early history of Christianity in Europe, over and over again, pagans are trying to make accommodations with Christians, and Christians are like, no, you must be destroyed. Your pagan temples must be destroyed. Your statues of Athena must be destroyed. Everything must be destroyed. And this comes from this one way or my way or the highway mentality that comes directly from the Ten Commandments, from Jehovah. When Pompeii was dug up, and thank God it was dug up when it was. If that had been dug up in the Middle Ages, they would have scraped all the murals off the walls. And you see the murals in people's houses of people making love, and how comfortable and happy they were in their sexual lives. There was no thing like Ken Russell's The Devil's reaction towards sex that Christianity brought here to Europe. And that's because people had less of a mentality towards possession and ownership, and of everything. Now, of course, you have to be careful, like a feeding and illegit. Although even thing like the legitimacy, this idea that the seed must be passed on by the father, and he must be the only father. That directly also comes from like the sons of Israel must only mate with the with the pagan women, as long as the child is raised as a Hebrew and all this stuff. That's where that originally comes from. And this like kind of blood ownership. And when the Christians came along, Christianity was basically a corrupted mind virus of Second Temple Rabbinical Judaism that was out to destroy Judaism. It failed, and then they started to instead destroy the pagans of Europe and then the rest of the pagans of the world. And when they'd done that, they split into Catholics and Protestants and started attacking each other. And before, they'd already split into Muslims and Christians. It's a mind virus that has to constantly destroy itself through replication and division. It's like basically a spiritual cancer. And so this mentality of my way or no way, one way or not any other way, is a survival mechanism that many humans in the West have developed directly because of this Abrahamic thing. When Christianity first came into the pagan world, the attitude would have been, maybe there's something in here for us. And you see that with Hinduism. Lots of Hindus look up to Jesus, the good aspects of Jesus Christ, and things like that. And you go to India and Hindu countries, and you'll always see pictures of Christian saints, because they'll say, "Oh, I like what Saint Francis of Assisi had to say," even though he's a practicing Hindu. Polytheism this is the difference. Polytheism is a philosophical idea as well as a spiritual one, and the relationship with gods and archetypes it's in flux. It changes, it adapts to modern and contemporary and cultural dynamics. It adapts, and this adaptation creates a more relaxing thing. So when you encounter a spiritual archetype from another culture, rather than saying it's an agent of the devil, or it's the lie of the Satan or something like that, you go to yourself, is there anything in this for me? Oh, I do like this. Oh, you're a Christian. Oh, I was reading about what Saint Francis of Assisi said. He's pretty cool. And that's how a pagan would have been, and how a Hindu will be. And they wouldn't say, "Oh, he's a devil worshipper who's leading me into the path of sin," which is how a Christian will see it, and also a jihadist type. And it's all this idea of like one God or no God, my way or the highway. And that mind virus has infected all of us. You look at the wars of Europe prior to Christianity, they were territorial wars. I mean, the Romans conquered Greece, but instead of destroying their gods, they said, "Oh, their gods are pretty cool," and incorporate them into their pantheon, which had already kind of picked up from a previous Celtic and Etruscan previous pagan pantheon. And that's why, Christianity was successful, because of the tolerance of pagans. On top of the actual slaughter of pagans in their millions, the pagans would also say, "Oh, okay, I'm down with that's cool. Oh, I like this character. Yeah, he's interesting. Oh, wow, that's interesting about this, that, and the other. This kind of thing." And they wouldn't have seen it as something to be eradicated, like the way an Abrahamic would. And you see that even in things like secular world. I saw I read an article about 2 years now, about 2 and 3 years ago, with Brian Cox, and Professor Brian Cox was suggesting that philosophy wasn't a real science, and it should be removed from university curriculum. That was a terrifying thing to read, because philosophy is the core dynamic, the engine, the grease that runs the engine of paganism. Paganism and Hinduism are philosophical spiritual paths. And that's why when I saw my Lovecraft video today, they will incorporate eventually Lovecraftian and other ideas into it, because they don't see other gods as demons. They see them as useful, accessible archetypes. This is why paganism is such a fantastic thing. It opens up your mind, and it also helps you to see other people. Like, see, you got onward Christian soldiers. You'll have a Christian look at somebody in a foreign country who has a very different religion and a different lifestyle and say, "We're all God's children." Yeah, you're God's children as long as you're Jehovah's children. A pagan would just go, "Oh, well, it's different paths to the same thing. What's the difference?" And that's the big difference. There's no desire to convert, or a belief that somehow they haven't found the real spiritual path yet until they have the Bible in their hand. Either the Catholic missals or the King James Version. The King James Version is actually much even worse. And that's why that film, The Devils, the Ken Russell film, The Devils, is so very important. Because it shows you what these people, what this mind virus will be like if it's allowed to infect people completely. And the scene, at the end of the film, Sister Janine is masturbating with a leg bone as a dildo that was handed to her by the witchfinder of Oliver Reed, Gardenier, the bishop. That's what she wanted. He knew that's what she wanted all along. The church fathers knew that they could use sexual hysteria, and these are psychopaths now, sexual hysteria and sexual insanity to create these hysterias that would be very useful for them politically. And that's why the nuns at Loudron were whipped up deliberately into a psychosexual frenzy by the Inquisition in order to achieve a political objective against an element within the Catholic Church who was seen as a little too pagan. And they wanted to and the Protestants were winning the Reformation in France on a philosophical level, on a theological or theocratical level, because they were pointing to people like Bishop Gardenier and saying, look, he shags women and everything. What he was is returning to being a pagan. And the sexual prohibitions on women is deliberately cultivated by the evangelical Abrahamics in order to weaponize them when as needed. Just like they use alcoholics and drug addicts. And if you look at any smear campaign on the internet, it's nearly always the same thing. It's usually unhinged females in tandem with alcoholics, drug addicts, and all around losers, male losers, and it's basically that program, that Loudron, that sort of like the devil's program is unleashed in them, and that's exactly how they behave until it's all over, and then they act like it never happened because the virus is switched on and the virus is switched off, and it leads to unnecessary conflicts in society. And that's what happened this morning at work with that guy. That was like, that should have never happened. It was a clash of egos and personalities, but ultimately it started at 100 and worked its way down to 0. It should have started itself at 0 and worked its way up until it burnt itself out. And that is all over. That's because we all have this, no matter how pagan we are, and no matter how detached we are, we're trying to delete from our DNA memory codes centuries and centuries of Abrahamic pollution of our genetic systems and the cancer of Christianity that flows through our spiritual lives. It is an ongoing project which won't be fulfilled in my lifetime, although I have to say I don't know, maybe I have 25 years left on this earth if I'm lucky, I hope, and healthy years. And in my lifetime I've seen the utter destruction of the Catholic Church and its power in Ireland. Almost utter destruction, to the point where, no one obeys it anymore. They only tolerate it. And it's happening in Poland now, finally. The Polish are finally wised up to what, now that they've gotten over the whole communism, the church, they realised that the church was anti-communist in Poland in the same way the Catholic Church was anti-English in Ireland. It was so they could become the next empire. So after the communists left Poland, the Catholic Church became the next empire. The same after the British left Ireland, the Catholic Church, Vatican, became the next empire. And then Poles have now figured out what the Irish figured out, that we were under another empire, and are starting to get rid of them and all these, the same kind of. I had a friend who's Polish, Uh, are all Polish women gorgeous? And she lives in the UK, and she sent me a video, and it was about like the same exact sex symbols, everything, the children, the nunneries, the mother and child homes, the illegal adoptions, the buggering of boys, the enslaving of women, identically took place in Poland right after the fall of communism that happened in Ireland after the British left. Exact a template, an actual, they stepped in, and it was exactly the same what happened. And it's happened in Canada, it's happened in Argentina, everywhere. It's like, I saw something recently that like a huge number of the politicians in Portugal were pedophiles, and they were all like working for the Catholic Church directly. I mean, it's this, and people are still going, oh, when will we get women? This is another thing I often hear, and I still hear it in Ireland. The Catholic Church needs to be reformed. Priests need to get married, and women should be allowed to become priests, and then we'll have a good Catholic Church. No. The Catholic Church needs to be obliterated from Europe. Christianity needs to be removed in the same way a piece of infective tissue is moved from a body. It has to be seen in that way. It's not hateful, it's not personal, it's not a vendetta, it's not a vengeance. It's a proactive, wise decision to help our people in Europe, and in Africa, and in, remember, pagans everywhere, in Asia and in North and South America, to remove that infected tissue as a medical procedure. As a, we have to start seeing Christians as someone who, and I mean this sincerely, I'm not putting you down as a person, as people who have a psychiatric disorder. They actually believe, unless they come from the Middle East, they actually believe that their salvation is an Arab who lived on the side, an Arab born in Egypt, or born in Bethlehem and grew up in Egypt. This is a horrific thing that has been foisted upon. I mean, when you see African Americans were were the biggest sufferers of the Abrahamic slave trade, both Islamic and Christian, and there they all are in churches or joining the nation of it, or joining as Muslim groups. And it's like, that's how powerful this mind virus is. I was talking to a woman yesterday, and she was saying that although she's a pagan now, she said the most terrifying experience was actually giving up on being a Catholic or being a Christian. I don't know if she was Catholic or Protestant, but giving up on the church is what word she said. I don't know what religion she was. And she said the reason is because I was going to have to start thinking for myself. Now you let that sit in there for a second. The reason why was she was going to have to take responsibility for her own spiritual growth. And if that, and she took responsibility for her own spiritual growth and will never look back. And that shows you the colonialization nature of it's like I saw this play on Broadway years ago called Checkmates, about Denzel Washington, when he was first starting out, when he was on ER, I think, was in it. And it was about a young professional hip black couple renting an apartment in a house owned by an elderly working class African American black couple. And the young guy downstairs he's really, really angry, and he's like, even though he's making lots of money in big business, he's got this thing that like he's acting like he's a Black Panther. And the old guy couldn't give a shit, and he's the one who actually had to live through Jim Crow. And he's just happy that he has a life now, and he has, everything's worked out for him. And he made a statement, and I've seen this so many times with these Irish nationalists as well. And he said, you know what you're like? He says, you're like the dog that's been chained to a pole. And you run around the pole, and then one day your owner comes along and takes the pole out of the ground, and you're still running around running around like you're still tied to that pole. And that's what that woman was saying to me, that the terror of the demarcation, of losing the absolute demarcation line, of the confines of the Christian worldview, was terrifying, because then she'd have to take a personal interest in her own soul, rather than her soul being subject to a series of conditions imposed upon it by a radical sect that came out of the desert about 1800 years ago and started hammering up temples and murdering pagans in the name of the one true God. The one true God, the one true law, the one true philosophy, not even a philosophy, the one true... You notice that also, all the philosophers in Christianity all vanished by the Middle Ages, because the only reason they tolerated philosophy for a while was because they knew that philosophy was central to pagan life, all pagan life. And so they gave us these Christian philosophers, lunatics like St. Thomas Aquinas, who was an absolute maniac. Thomas Aquinas was an absolute lunatic. And you'll still hear people, Christians here in Ireland, go, as Aquinas said, this is a guy who said that women's periods were like cancer and all these kind of diseases, and every pagan must be wiped off the face of the earth. And this is, but he's a philosopher, and because they had to maintain this facade of having philosophers like St. Thomas Aquinas, for so long to say, look, we have philosophy too. And then as soon as he was gone, they were gone. They're just straight on with cardinal law, And this whole thing of the Council of Nicaea, the Council of Whitby, Vatican II. These are not about opening up the Christian religion, the synod of, the Free Presbyterian Churches of Scotland and this kind of thing. These are not about opening up. These are about tightening up as culture changes. Vatican II wasn't designed to accommodate cultural changes in the West during the 1960s. Vatican II was designed to control Catholics within the changing zeitgeist. If you've read the book In God's Name by Mr. Yallop, it's quite clear what they were up to. They put out all these things telling all the Catholics that, there's going to be big changes in the church. And Catholics thought that, some birth control would be allowed, like condoms, which would have been, a fair enough compromise. And so devout Catholics all over the world were expecting that they were going to be able to use things like condoms or IUDs that would not actually interfere directly post, with the actual egg at the very point of conception, or altering the body's physiology. And what they did was they actually tightened up the rules on contraception. They banned the Catholic Mass, which is probably the last vestige. Catholics who grew up during the pre-Vatican II period, where they had the Roman Mass, the Latin Mass, were very privileged actually, because they were directly connected to rites that existed. We're going right back to the vestiges of ancient Rome and the symposiums and temples of ancient Greece, and it was as pagan as anything. And what happened was that in Vatican II was, instead of accommodating the modern world, they took advantage of changes in society to kill paganism once and for all. The last vestige of paganism in terms of power force was the Latin Mass, and they absolutely obliterated that at the end. And they banned, and in Yallop's book In God's Name, he shows how at the same time that they had banned a complete outright on birth control, the Vatican Bank was a shareholder in an Italian company called Ovo Novum, which was the biggest producer of contraceptive pills in the world at the time. And these contraceptive pills were going to Protestant countries in the Middle East. So you see there's a genocidal aspect to it as well, killing out their enemies. You cannot be kind, and Christians go around saying, Christianity is all about kindness and goodness and looking after and loving your fellow man. It's only if they're fellow Christians, that's it. And it has damaged us on so many levels, and I'm living testimony of someone who has been, when people talk about they've been damaged as a child by vaccines, or they've been damaged as a child by a bad medical procedure, or damaged as a child by an abusive family or parents. I was damaged as a child by an abusive religion in a country where Catholicism held absolute sway. And when I was 14 years old, I did that to the crucifix above the what's the name of the church? It's like the Sacred Blood or something like that, on Shangan Road in Ballymun, and I've never looked back since. And there was no fear, no nothing, and it was liberation at that moment. My friends who went, "Oh, that's a terrible thing to do, you'll go to hell," and they went to hell. I found freedom. Take care.